We are living in a new era, the deepest technological revolution in human history.
Good afternoon. Sorry, I'll try that again. Good afternoon. Hello. Thank you for saying hello. It's always nice to connect. My name's Andrew Collinson. I'm Research Director of STL Partners. The GSMA kindly asked me to moderate today's session on testing. And research is a kind of natural partner to testing, because research is finding things out. Testing is finding things out about things that do or don't work. And personally, I see testing as a critical part of the success process. In my mind, it's part of the test and learn loop, which is a critical aspect of success. So I'm really interested in today's conversation. We've got 3 great presentations, and I'll introduce them each in turn. I won't try and line them all up now. And they all cover slightly different aspects of testing in a telecoms environment. So without ado, I'm going to pass on to our first speakers, which is a joint presentation from Yuri van der Briekel and Raktik Meka. Now, Yuri is from, excuse me while I lift my glasses to read properly, VP Strategic Partnerships and Board Chair of NetSec Open, Cybersecurity Standardization and Certification Industry Non-Profit Organization, which might be one of the longest job titles I've ever seen. And he also works for Spirent. And Raktik, who has a much shorter job description, and I think he probably needs to work harder on his job description, which is Business Development Leader for Global Telecoms Industry for the IBM. So can we give them a warm round of applause and welcome to the stage here, please? Thank you.
By the way, great fan of all the work that STL Partner does, and really appreciate your contribution to the industry. Hello, everyone. I'm Rakshit Mehta. As Andrew said, I'm the Industry Business Development Leader for Telecom Industry at IBM. My role primarily is around developing the ecosystem and partnerships for telecom industry. And one of the perks of the job is to work with great innovators from this industry, such as Spirent, and happy to work with Yuri at Spirent on some of the challenges that we're going to discuss. Yuri, over to you for introduction.
Yeah, hi, I'm Yuri van der Briekel, and this is my shorter, normal title that Andrew referred to. And I work on ecosystem alliances in Spirent, and it involves working with partners like IBM, as well as industry organizations as NetSec Open and TIP from the next speaker here.
So as we look at how telecom industry is evolving, right? And if you look at this event this time, it's great. We are back in full force. 5G is getting deployed. The innovations we are seeing here from 5G technology, from cloud, AI, new use cases coming up from the drone technology and from technologies such as AR and VR. It is impressive on what 5G can put together if we all work together as an industry. What we think is a challenge is how networks are going to be managed with 5G, with how they are getting deployed in multi-vendor, multi-cloud environments, and how the CSPs in the industry are going to cope up with it. So we think CSPs operate under 3 pressure points. One is the business pressure, which is going to look at how the new business models are evolving. We are looking at a growth in B2B as a primary business case for 5G investments. If you look at the B2C, depending on the geography, you have challenges on the ARPU. People who've been in the industry know that. Average revenue per user is either flat or declining. New entrants in the market. Some markets do have price caps by the government, so there are challenges there that cause that. So the primary business case is on B2B. The other challenge is the technology challenge, the technology pressure point, which is you're implementing networks now on multiple clouds, sometimes bringing public clouds on-prem with distributed cloud technology, and taking your workloads which were on-prem to public cloud. We've seen those architectural decisions being made in the industry. We've also seen the usage of multiple vendors to deliver things such as 5G core. In the 4G world, TPC was typically you have a full stack vendor and it's managed. Now you see 3 or 4 vendors providing a set of capability for 5G core. Now add to that the complexities of Open RAN as that is evolving with multiple vendors for the various radio componentry, the DU, the CU, the radio units for people who track that closely, and you get a mix of 10, 12, maybe 20 vendors in some deployments. And that causes a big challenge in terms of managing the technology release pipeline. If you look at software updates that were happening in the past, when I joined the industry 20 plus decades ago, it was 1 major release a year, 1 minor release a year. You're good. And if there is a hot fix needed, we'll deal with it in real time. Now, with your 10 plus vendors, you have asynchronous updates coming from each vendor for different components. How do you put that together and use your existing processes to run that is the challenge. So we have that as one. The last one, and I think this is the most important one, which is the organizational pressure. The organizational pressure is, do you have the skills to transform your network from how they were operating in full stack world of the 4G to a horizontal stack world of the 5G, where you have multiple vendors, you have multiple clouds, and each vendor is providing a single component, maybe a few more. And then you're also looking at how the CSPs are looking at skills investments, like going from a NOC culture to an SRE culture. These are key infusion points that change our industry. And the good news is we come out strong. With the industry comes out strong as a diamond with all these pressures. We have seen over the last few decades, communications has been the backbone of our society, and nothing could have shown that more with the pandemic contributions of the industry. So moving on, we look at, as I said, multi-vendor. On the left, you see multi-vendor network functions going into a network. You look at the release cadence that is required is fairly complex, and it's an order of magnitude more complex than what the CSPs in the industry are used to. And lastly, the number of labs have scaled up. Now you have multiple vendor labs delivering you software on an ongoing basis, 3, 4, 5 releases a year. Then you have your own labs that you're putting that all together. You have an SI who's putting that all together, a systems integrator, and maybe multiple systems integrator, and then you have your live environment. Now you've got to orchestrate these releases across all of these environments. It's a task. And we believe that we have, IBM Inspired, we have a solution that puts in automation first, AI first into solving this problem, and we are working with CSPs globally to put that to life. So over to you, Yuri, on how we are doing that.
Thanks, Rakshit. So as Rakshit mentioned, there's a lot of challenges the communication service provider has to deal with in this transition to launching new 5G services. And if you look today, it takes anywhere from 5 to 9 months to get a release done. And there's a lot of complex testing that's happening across various labs in that stage. And now you add cloud native to that mix, and it makes it ever more complicated. So what we're proposing is a model of a central hub where all the continuous testing happens, where that gets automated, and where also the interactions and the collaborations with the vendor happens, so that all of that is much more efficient, faster, and from there it can be reused in the actual deployment process, taking some of those tests from that automated lab environment and reusing it in staging, in deployment, as well as in validation post-deployment to make sure all of that works well. And we have one example customer here, Spirent has, in Spain, where they were able to increase their 5G private network release cycle by 3x by deploying this continuous test and deployment model. And we really see the industry embracing this. Another example is a pilot that Spirent and IBM did together with Vodafone earlier this year and end of last year, where we built a pipeline where they deal with updates to the 5G network. So here on the left, we have a new 5G core network function come in from a vendor that triggers an automated pipeline that sets off a whole series of automated testing, including lab management. And from there, if all of that passes, there's a release approval process, and from there, it rolls into the actual deployment. And the only manual step in this entire pipeline is the release approval itself, where a couple more checks and balances are done before things go live and roll out. And that's compared to many, many months that this process would take before. Looking at it in slightly more detail, there's a lot happening in this process. Not only are we automating the lab, the automation, the test cases, but also deploying the myriad of vendors that make up this solution. And then one example is we have a US operator that's running 250,000 proactive active tests in the Life network every day to use as a feedback loop into service assurance back to the start of the automation process. And that's just one slice of one of the boxes on this chart. And I'm using that as an example to illustrate how much work we need to do as an industry to really help these 5G networks deploy and become cloud native. So Rakshit, with that.
Yeah, so we are working together on multiple customer use cases and bringing this methodology and group of technologies we put together and providing a solution to this challenge. Now, just to wrap this up, as we look at the future, right, and on the right, you will see, yes, deployments in 5G core, moving on to standalone configurations. We've seen that in the industry. Investments in sustainability and energy efficiency initiatives, bringing in more software controls within the network to achieve that. Think of more complexities that touch the network many times for that. You're adding new 5G technology like 5G slicing, more complex use cases, stitching together slices across a multi-domain, multi-vendor environment, and making sure those slices work every time with the software lifecycle management going on. Open RAN is another area that is being trialed and being invested in, adds to more vendor diversity, obviously brings value to the innovation that goes in the network, but also adds to complexity of managing yet another set of vendors in your network. And lastly, investments in private 5G, which is an extension of taking the value of 5G and moving it on the other side of the radio tower, typically at the enterprise edge. And then you're looking at managing a set of vendors on that. So to address that, automation and AI are going to be key enablers of the solution, which IBM and Spirent are working together in putting that infusion of technology which addresses this challenge with our core competencies put together, and offering solutions that address not just the technology, but also the processes, the skills, the tooling, and the AI needed to get to the next level to address challenges in the 5G network. We thank you for your time to listen to us, and we look forward to questions during the panel and engage us at the event if you find this useful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Yuri and Rakshit. And next on stage, we have Kristian Toivo, who's Executive Director of the Telecom Infra Project, and Evelyn Remaley, who's a partner at Wilkinson, Barker and Knauer. So big round of applause for the next speakers. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the intro. Great to be with you all today and our fellow panelists who are just doing amazing things on the training side. So my name is Evelyn Remaley. I am a partner at Wilkinson, Barker, Knauer, but in my previous life, I was the acting administrator for the United States National Telecommunications and Information Administration. So I am the policy wonk on your panel today. I'm going to be covering that perspective and just going to give a little bit of a viewpoint in terms of how governments are thinking about testing and the role it is playing in the ecosystem right now. So while I was in the US government, we were, of course, very focused on trying to really foster the deployment of open, disaggregated telecommunications network. Open RAN was quite a focus of ours. And in that effort, we realized that the deployment was not happening quite as rapidly as we had hoped. And we did realize that there were some barriers in the ecosystem that still needed to be worked out to ensure that this technology could actually take hold, make it in the marketplace. And so what were some of those barriers? Well, of course, working with our industry partners, we realized that there were several things that were inhibiting them from adopting this technology. They all were very interested in it, committed, but there were several things. There were concerns about reliability when they're actually out, serving customers. They have public safety concerns and regulatory concerns. There were some reliability issues there. They were concerned that these Open RAN systems were hard to buy. They're complex. It was really hard to do the integration solely. They were also concerned that economies of scale just weren't emerging fast enough to make, to make the buying easier and to provide them a way to actually buy an integrated system. And then they also mentioned what they were missing was real end-to-end testing, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So how to solve for these barriers? Well, we realized in that dialogue that testing, certification, and end-to-end testing and certification was something that was really missing from the marketplace, from the ecosystem that could move these technologies forward, allow them to really catch hold in the marketplace. So how to solve for this, right? Well, we realized that, again, end-to-end testing is extremely important, that, just doing component level, plug fests, all of those are extremely valuable, beneficial. We're learning a lot, but without having carrier grade end-to-end, again, operators were struggling to buy and build these systems. Another key point was that they were looking for a lifecycle approach to testing. So not just one and done, but how do we set up a regime, a testing ecosystem that allows us to keep continuously testing as we go on. And then the third piece was taking a global view. There's a lot of regional testing going on and a lot of labs looking at that component testing, but who was looking globally so that they knew that, again, economies of scale, that global supplier base. So where are we? Well, this is why I'm glad to be sharing the stage with Kristian, because the Telecom Infra Project is someone who's been doing a lot of thinking about this. But I will say from the government perspective, there is quite a bit of consensus forming. My former agency, NTIA, was recently granted $1.5 billion from the US government to, again, spearhead, put investment into the marketplace to get this activity going. And they did a request for comment recently, and this training and certification issue was talked about time and time again being a gap in the ecosystem. So, you know, this is perhaps an area where government investing and private investing will continue to take place. So we're hopeful, and with that, let me pass it over to Kristian, who's going to talk about TIP's vision for this.
Thank you, Evelyn. So basically, I will do something that very fits well with what the previous speakers talked about, because to move into that, what we call system release certification, and I use the case of Open RAN, is really very much about systematic, automated testing regime that also includes a lifecycle management process. So TIP is a trade association with more than 600 members. The whole mission is about enabling open and disaggregated telecom solutions to become ready and get market acceptance and be deployed. We have a test and validation framework that we recently upgraded to match the system view with the bronze, silver, gold badging. To be honest, we only have bronze badges issued so far, because getting a silver or a gold badge requires true system level certification and deployment in the field. So we are working on getting into that mode. Reflecting a bit on Open RAN as something that I have in my previous career, and certainly now as heading TIP, been observing and reflecting on. There's been a journey that's been ongoing for the last 4 or 5 years. I would say we are at a stage where the technology is not anymore a question. It's about how do we make that technology really ready for commercial scale deployment. And it also means that we need maybe less of plug fests, less of trials, but more focus on systematic integration, verification, certification, and commercial deployment. Open RAN is a complex beast, so I will jump over this slide because it will take too long to go through. But basically what we have come up as a part of the discussion, partly as on our journey to drive the acceleration of Open RAN on the global marketplace, but also as part of that process that Evelyn referred to that has been triggered in the United States. We have been working on evolving our thinking about what type of process is really needed to get a mission-critical RAN solution, which is built of different components coming from different vendors, up to a level that is easily purchasable and deployable on commercial scale. It's very much about aligning supply and demand. It's about creating industry roadmaps where the operator demands are matched by what is possible in terms of the available products to be fulfilled. It is about making sure that those products and components that constitute the system actually have been tested thoroughly in the development phase, in a conformance phase where interfaces and conformance to standards are validated. And when they are, then those systems that are basically defined to be deployed or deployable by the operators, they do need to be certified. The results need to be made available. TIP has something called the TIP Exchange, which we are upgrading now to its second version, which is let's say, a repository where test results and also the performance and participating solutions or components that constitute the solutions are presented to the participating operators. And very importantly, this process needs to be a live process, because any complex system, particularly one that consists of solution components from different vendors, is kind of a living system, so it needs to be regularly revalidated in terms of ensuring that it still fulfills the requirements that constitute the certification. There's also a reality that is good to consider. What does it mean when you test a solution that it should be available to the market and acceptable for operators to be deployed? This includes a lot of specific tests that assume that the underlying components, their standards compliance, their interworking has already been ensured. However, to ensure that the actual system performs the way it's intended, there's a number of classes of tests that need to be executed in features and functionality, mobility performance, scalability, security, operability, and energy efficiency, which is talked very much about now in RAN systems particularly. And under these classes of testing, there's a multitude of test cases that also keep on evolving as the technology and the use cases the technology is applied for keep on evolving. Now, obviously, something like this to be done on an industrial scale and also being repeatable on a regular basis can only work when it's automated. It needs to be automated in terms of how you manage the individual components that come in to the actual testing, bearing in mind that there are different vendors involved. It needs to be automated in terms of execution of the tests, and it needs to be documented in a way that is transparent and can be linked back to the tests that have been performed. And underlying it all, there needs to be a configuration management of certainly the system under test, but also everything else that is used in the testing, for example, the test tools and various scripts that are involved. So all of this is not possible without a significant uplift to automation, and we need the type of partners in the ecosystem that have been also on the stage here to be intimately part of this process. Thank you.
Kristian and Evelyn, thank you. I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, who's the last of the presentations, and after that we'll have a panel where I'm going to be exploring some of the issues with all of the speakers. And our next speaker is Eden Fulgo, who is the founder and CEO of Mobot. So a big round of applause, please, for Eden. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eden, and I'm the founder and CEO of Mobot. What's been really exciting about all of the presentations so far is we're all focused on thinking about how we can make testing a core part of all of the innovation that's been driving on the hardware side. But I think the other consideration here is that as there is all of this fragmentation, diversification of different hardware platforms in mobile, there's also the software consideration, where software also needs to be iterating and pivoting alongside all of these different hardware platforms. And so what I want to share today is a little bit about what our team is building in order to accelerate physical testing, because what we've observed is that as hardware platforms get more complex and there's different cellular networks, mobile interfaces that software engineering teams need to design for, there's actually going to be more complex testing requirements. And so my background actually started out more on the software side. I was working as a product manager, just helping to deploy different web applications for browsers. And that was kind of where I got exposure to how in a more software environment, there's continuous deployment, continuous testing, and there's a lot of automated tests that run. When I then took a job at a medical device startup, I realized all of a sudden that with the introduction of iOS and Android and phones in tablet and tablets in landscape and portrait mode orientations, there are all of a sudden all of these different physical considerations for testing that just didn't used to exist. And so that was what inspired me to fundamentally start Mobot. And so I think we're all probably very familiar with this problem. Software is complex, and the other variable and permutations that make this an even more interesting challenge is your software is constantly changing. iOS and Android updates are being pushed constantly to the App Store and to Google Play. And then on top of that, we have new form factors, new phones, new types of screens, and IoT devices, point-of-sale systems, Bluetooth peripherals are constantly being added to the mix. And so all of a sudden, software engineers now have to adapt their software and the code they're writing to support this large set of hardware devices as well. And so it's no longer possible to just write all of your code in this perfect emulated environment, run some test in the cloud, and then hope that it works. You actually have to test on real phones, real smartwatches, real devices with real cellular networks. And so in doing so, physical testing is more important than ever. And so the way that software engineers have historically thought about testing is kind of like a pyramid. You have your unit tests where you write a bunch of code, and then you have your integration tests to hook in with APIs, SDKs, third-party APIs, making sure that everything works together. And there's also, on some level, a set of UI automated tests that are built using frameworks provided by iOS and Android. So usually XCUI test is a testing framework that's available by Apple, and Espresso is a testing framework available by Google for Android. And so historically, engineers have tried to write tests for these different platforms. But what's kind of ended up happening is as the world of hardware has been accelerating, you have Motorola, LG, Google Pixel, Samsung, you have iPhones, you have iOS 16 that's come out, you have Android 13 coming out, you have Android 14, the developer beta, and iOS 17 coming out soon, and who knows, all of the new phones, smartwatches that are coming out, is disproportionately that top of the testing pyramid has become bigger and bigger. There's this need for more manual testing to keep up with just the physical variations, the physical permutations that exist. And so the other tests that have been written sort of at the bottom of the testing pyramid seem to be shrinking more and more because there's more of a need to test on real devices. And so what we're building at Mobot is we want to make the testing process realistic. You should be testing the way that humans, real customers, real end users are using software on actual physical hardware devices. And so there's no longer this perfect world where you can just run your test in an emulator. You do need to be incorporating machine learning, computer vision, mechanical robots, physical devices, and have all of this being trained and supervised by humans to augment the testing process. Because fundamentally, the test cases have to be designed according to human use cases. And so when we take a look at the kinds of test cases that are most common, we're talking things like push notifications. Is the app foregrounded? Is the app backgrounded? Is data syncing when you're connected to a particular cellular network? What about the connectivity of different Bluetooth devices? For example, if you're in a hospital and you are running in and out of a stairwell, do you have good connectivity in order to sync data? These are all different kinds of real-world use cases that currently product and software engineering teams are having challenges with testing. And the only solution is to actually do the testing physically on real devices. And so as we think about the software development lifecycle, we see that software engineers should continue to write their mobile test cases and their unit tests that are automated. They run on every pull request. They run every single time you change your code. But right before you release a new version to the App Store or Google Play, especially after Apple and Google have released new versions of their operating systems, when there are new cell phones that have been released by Samsung and Google, you want to make sure that you're testing physically. And you need to be testing efficiently on the right number of devices, and so it needs to be a full set of tests. And so this is what we do at Mobot. We are building commoditized mechanical robots that will actually be able to automate across anyone's application on a physical phone. And so what you're seeing here is a deep linking test. It's very simple. You have to go on Instagram, you tap on an ad, and then you open Spotify. So that is something that touches on 4 or 5 different applications that historically hasn't been possible to automate. And so with physical automation with a mechanical robot, we can actually bring a new level of software testing and realism to physical testing and to the way the end users are experiencing a product. So here's an example with one of Mobot's customers. They have a React Native app that runs and is deployed on a weekly basis to iOS and Android. And so they're the #1 neobank in the US, and they have thousands of test cases. Then they use Detox, which is a automated testing framework, to build a suite of automated test cases that then run on every pull request. But they also have historically had 5 different team members who would rotate on an iPhone, an Android device, whoever's personal device was readily available for testing. And they would have to do these same regression tests repetitively, week after week after week. And so you can imagine over time, if you're just manually, physically doing these tests, it ends up creating a lot of repetition. Human error is introduced, even if you have a checklist. And it's also very hard to carefully document rigorously with screenshots, timestamps, logging information, especially when you have crashes that occur, device logs that need to be pulled from the device during testing. It's extremely painful to do this testing, and traditional software emulation hasn't been able to solve this problem. And so what we've been doing at Mobot with this team is we've been actually working with them to do all of the testing that these 5 team members are having to do across a whole week. We've been able to shrink that testing process down to a single day. So that means on day 1, they cut a release for Mobot, and then Mobot runs through the tests with our fleet of robots. And then on the second day, their team reviews all of the results, reviews the checklist that was generated by Mobot, and then makes a go or no-go decision. Does this need to actually get hot fixed, and do they need to repair the bugs that Mobot and remediate the bugs that Mobot has found, or is this sufficient that they can actually deploy to the App Store and Google Play, and they can remediate the bugs in a subsequent test cycle? And so within the last few months of working with Mobot, they've really been able to decrease the amount of manual labor that's involved in this process. And I think in 2023, that's one of the biggest reactions I normally get from folks, is they're just surprised at how much manual labor, manual tapping on real phones is required to do this process. This was a process that I personally had to experience as a product manager, and is now something that we're going to be augmenting with real mechanical robots in order to provide significantly more test coverage. And so I think more broadly, the thing that I'm excited about is that testing innovation isn't something that only has to happen on the hardware side. There's actually a way to use commoditized hardware, because hardware is so accessible now, to actually solve real software problems. So if anyone would like to connect further, my LinkedIn profile is in the QR code. Would love to learn more about some of the challenges that your team is facing. I think there's a lot of commonality in the way that testing can evolve on the hardware and software side. I think there's a lot of shared best practices, a lot of opportunity to really standardize. And I think if we can actually standardize the way that engineering teams are building hardware and software and consolidate some of these processes together, there's going to be more aggregation and efficiency during that testing process. Thank you so much.
Stay on stage. Do you want to grab a seat? Thank you so much, Eden. What a great presentation. Great energy. Can I ask the other speakers to join me on stage? We're going to do a bit of a Q&A. Do take a seat. I'm going to grab the end one here. I don't think I need that, so I'll drop it down. So, thank you. So, just while we're all settling ourselves down, I've got 3 simple questions that I'm going to ask the panelists. And I gave them a bit of prep for this. But just to keep things a little bit more random and spontaneous, at the very end of this, I'm going to ask one question. I'm going to take one question from the audience. And I'm going to allocate that question to the person who gives me the most animated indication that they want to ask a question. So you've got to wave your hand in the air, jump up and down, or do something just to prove that you really, really, really want to ask a question, right? Just to make it a bit different, okay? So that's coming up at the end. I hope you're getting ready for that. Thank you very much, everyone, for your presentations. It was genuinely really interesting, and very different environments you're looking at, and very different things you're testing. And the 3 questions I have in mind, and I'm going to read them out because I summarized them to you at the beginning as one word, each, which is opportunity, challenge, and next steps. And I thought, well, I'd try and make it a little bit more specific to make it clearer. So the first question is going to be, if everything you want happened, so in the roles that you're working in and the things you're trying to achieve, if everything you want happened, what would the world look like? How would it be different? So I'm just going to give you a chance to think about that while I articulate the next 2 questions to prepare you for those. The second one will be, what is the thing that most things to change to make that come true? So, you know, what's the thing you most want to happen? What's the thing that most needs to change? And the third is, what should be done about that and whom? Ideally, it being you doing the thing, but of course it may be someone else you want to do it. So those are the three questions I've got, and then we'll take, if you are up for it, an animated question from the audience at the end. So first question, if everything you want happened, what would the world look like? How would it be different? And if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you, Evelyn, because you come from a world where you've been working for an organization or organizations that want something specific to happen. Obviously, you're in a slightly different place now, but what would your answer to that question be?
So I would say, you know, the vision that we'd like to see take hold is for this more innovative supplier environment for mobile networks to emerge, and through that allowing shorter generations of innovation, so we're not waiting, you know, 10 years for new systems to have new innovation happening in the communications landscape. So getting that richness, getting more collaboration amongst players in the ecosystem, so that we can move the innovation forward and see more progress for our society, from the good things that will come from that competition, and seeing the emergence of different new products and services come out of the collaboration from a more diverse marketplace.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's a great answer. I'm going to go to Eden next. Eden, what would your answer to this question be?
I think one thing that's really exciting for me about the future is I hope that with all of the innovation that's happening, the way that engineers, the way that companies and teams think about testing is going to evolve. That it's not just this annoying a process that you tack on at the back of a product development process that's like blocking you from innovation. I'd love us to get to a point where testing is just such a normalized, standardized part of development and innovation that engineering teams know to plan around it, that it's, you know, governments and institutions can actually embrace it as an opportunity for feedback and for improvement and innovation. And so I think that is something that's really exciting, that I hope with just the availability of different types of testing and more collaboration between institutions, that's something that can be more and more accessible.
So starting with Evelyn, we're saying like more collaboration. You're talking more of a kind of culture shift in terms of thinking about testing as part of the process. Raksha, I'm going to come this way. So Raksha, what's your answer to the question?
I would look at, if these challenges were solved, it would create an innovation highway from concept to taking it to a product view, whether it's a software or hardware product, getting it tested and deployed and getting the benefit of that innovation to the industry and at the end to the customer. So and today, the processes that block it, slow it down, sometimes stall it in the middle, and the access, and I would call it the innovation flywheel, doesn't end to the benefit to the consumer in many ways. So if we can solve these problems, you create this highway of innovation from concept, getting it down to execution, as we have called.
So if I were to try and summarize your answer, I'd probably say it's the theme of the show, which is velocity.
Yeah.
You'd like things to go quicker.
Absolutely.
That's cool.
Time to market, time to innovation going into the consumer's benefit.
Kristian, thank you. Thank you, Rachel. That's great.
Yeah, so I spent most of my professional life in an environment where we've been developing and actually testing and bringing to market complex mission-critical cellular systems. I think what we see now with this transformation, which is really driven by the fact that we need more diversity, we need to kind of get more innovation in, that is only possible through opening up, disaggregating, to kind of bring in more into the pool. Now what I would want to see happen is that we get to that same disciplined, structured way of bringing ready solutions out to the market that are easy for the operators to purchase and to deploy and basically provide all those great benefits and services that Evelyn was referring to.
So maybe I'll try and summarize that as somewhere between confidence or the ability to be confident in the system working.
Yes.
Okay, that's great. And Yuri, your answer.
Yeah, I would add to the opportunity of what I'd like to see happen is that operators make billions and billions of dollars of extra money from 5G slicing, private 5G MEC, right? All supported by an O-RAN network, 5G standalone core, everything cloud native. Because if that were to happen, that means that all the testing would be automated and working well, right? Because that's really the complex opportunity here. Like, when do the customers come, and when is the technology ready to support it? So that's what I would say.
Okay, so yours is more about how the ecosystem structures itself to be able to pull through all manner of different changes using the latest technologies. Okay, that's great. Well, thank you very much. So I don't know if, when I was a kid, there used to be Tom and Jerry cartoons, and sometimes Tom would have like the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder, and the angel would be saying, oh yeah, Tom, be nice to the mouse, and the other would say, kill it, kill it. So we've just done the angel question, which is, what would you like the world to be like? What's great about the world? Now here's the devil question. What needs to change? What needs to get out of your way to make this happen? And I'm gonna start with you again, Yuri, if I may. I'm gonna go down the line this time to keep you all alert and a sense of fear.
Well, that didn't give me much thinking time. But yeah, I would say, I mean, like you've seen the theme in all our presentations, right? This is super complex technology at a much faster pace than ever before, with more variation. And what for the little bubble that I'm involved in on the testing side, that needs to come front and center in making these successful, versus it being something that you just allocate some time for at the end of a much larger process.
So more time, it needs to be more thought of in the process. It needs to be more front of mind.
Yeah, it needs to be part of the solution, right? Because that's the theme you saw here, is that the complexity is enormous. It can't just be an afterthought anymore.
And it is an afterthought. Is your contention?
I would say the longer back you go, the more of an afterthought it was. Today, in most networks, it is a big part of it, but it needs to become even more. If this automated cloud-native 5G, O-RAN, multi-vendor disaggregation, if that's all going to play out to support lots of these additional use cases,
Okay, that was great. How about you, Kristian? What's your...
So I think all the technology is there from the likes of Spirent and IBM and others. So I don't think there is anything in the technology that hinders us to do an efficient and more rapid, complete testing. I think, the biggest challenges I see are in the area of how you get a rather complex ecosystem to work together. It's hard enough in an organization where you have different departments. You have to talk about an ecosystem that is very focused on creating the best possible technology. That technology needs to come together, be tested and certified to a level that enables it to be deployed. And that kind of transformation of how individual companies come together, also what are the business models and operational models supporting that, enabling to use the great automation technology that already exists. That, for me, is where the efforts need to be.
Okay, so getting everyone to work together is the challenge. Evelyn?
So I think similarly, I think the risk of entropy, right? I think that when you're trying to have a very diffuse, disaggregated, distributed system work, you need good governance.
You need what, sorry?
Good governance.
Good governance.
Yes, and I think that with the ecosystem that we're trying to move towards, create that governance layer is still missing. And I do think testing and certification is an important part of that, to bring that entropy together so you don't have fragmentation. And there's a layer of the way that all those distributed parts can come together and move in the same direction. Without, I feel that if we don't get to that point, and again, I think testing is an important part of that governance model to give confidence, that we're going to end up with stasis when, you know, the opportunity is so close to really move ahead.
Okay, governance. Okay, got you. Rakshit.
On very similar lines, when we look at the intersection of organization skills and technology such as AI and automation, and providing the right balance of them working together. Things like you have organizational processes that trust AI, and you trust AI based on the trustworthiness of the technology behind it. And how do you balance that in terms of decision making so the organizational processes allow automation to actually play a role and accelerate innovation? And that balance is I think, is going to take some time to get in place, and that's one of the inhibitors of this at this point.
Okay, thank you, Raksha. And Eden, how about you? Your challenge.
I think one of the things that kind of keeps me up at night is that a lot of engineering teams out there aren't thinking about how complex the hardware world has evolved, especially if they're focused, and I'm talking more on the software side. I think there's sort of a presumption or a hope that, you know, the hardware ecosystem is going to figure it out, and there's sort of these like siloed responsibilities where software can just deliver, you know, the one deliverable, the one app, and like just trust that it'll work on all cellular networks, all hardware, all graphics cards, all cameras, you know, all types of devices. And I think that we're just seeing in the real world that that's not actually true. And as consumers, we often run into challenges, but there are all these different edge cases that engineering teams on the software side haven't been equipped with the right knowledge, the right culture shift, the right mindset to actually adopt that into day-to-day practices when they're writing code. And I think there is just more of a need for collaboration and discussion between hardware and software ecosystems and providers. And I think that hasn't always been something that's standardized. I do feel like there's a lot of industry conversation on one side for hardware and another side for software. Different industry events, different conferences, I feel like there needs to be more collaboration there, and I hope that that's something that will happen in the next few years.
Okay, thank you. Well, look, those are all really interesting answers. Before I go to the last question, which was what should be done about it, what needs to change? Observation I have just listening to you and taking part in this is that I sort of feel like testing sounds and feels like the forgotten child of innovation. That was my sort of, you know, my kind of editorial instinct. It feels like that. Is that right? Is this just my impression of this narrative that I'm hearing? Or do you think that really, because you say it needs to be more front of mind, we need better governance, we need better stakeholder management, basically saying it's happening in a very divergent way and not in a strategic way. And it kind of feels like it needs, to use your phrase, better governance, better stakeholder management, higher visibility in the cycle. Is that fair? That's what I'm hearing from you. I'm playing it back to you, and you're looking at me like, what?
Well, if I may, it is right now looked at a distinct process that you need to implement this to get the innovation from concept towards execution in place, right? What we need to get is it blended into the development cycle, so it doesn't feel like a distinct process as a inhibitor of the speed that the innovation needs to move through that.
Do you think testing is seen as a bit of a problem by the rest of the organization? Because, I mean, I heard the word afterthought, I heard the word governance, I heard the word, you know, front of mind, putting it in. It seems like it's almost thought of as a bit of a problem, like, oh my God, we've got to test it now. Is that?
If I may add to that, I don't think it's an afterthought. I mean, in the industry that we are talking about here, particularly when it comes to telecommunication systems, I mean, testing is a fundamental, clear part of any process for any company, organization involved. However, because of the increasing complexity, demands, there is a need to keep up. It also has a cost element to it, and particularly when the ecosystem is more fragmented, distributed, it's harder to find the model on which to do that. Hence, I do believe there is a need for, to Evelyn's earlier point, you know, there is an interest with governments to kind of ensure that happens. There's a role for organizations like TIP, industry bodies, to take a role to kind of pull that together in a model that is fair and structured in a way. But I wouldn't say it's forgotten. I think it's an intimate part of software or hardware development for that sake.
Okay.
And I would also add that the industry is already investing a lot in testing and has done so for many years, right? We just have to make sure that we line it up. So we have the vision of making, a lot more from all these new 5G technologies in new markets, right? The technology is there from lots of vendors and ecosystems, and now we just need to make sure that all the existing test investment and processes in the organization lines up well with all these new plans.
Thank you. Now look, we've got about I think we've got 5 minutes left. The clock's saying 1, or could someone just let me know which is the correct answer? 4 minutes, okay, thank you. I have got a question for the panelists. Does anyone want to ask a question, or shall I spend this time asking my question? Nobody's vibrating furiously, so I'm going to ask a question. So my question for you each is, what one thing needs to change? And I'm going to start with you, Eden, first, and then I'll go to you, Evelyn, next, and then I'll go Rakshit, Kristian, and finish the jury.
I think one thing that, going back to sort of the discussion we were just having, is I think testing has historically been a process where you have to do it manually. There's some sort of subjectivity, objectivity, like the lines are blurry, right? How do we know that the product is ready? How do you define ready? What are the standards, the governance to determine that something is ready? I think testing historically has been something that's required a lot of human input, a lot of human literal manual labor, like I was talking about in my presentation. And so one thing that I'm excited about is that can change. If we can equip better infrastructure, better tooling for organizations to do testing, I think the perception of testing is something that can be more agile. It can be better integrated into the development process. To use a silly example, I don't think, I think, like, for example, washing clothes used to be something that wasn't, as perceived as an innovative part of the process until we had laundry machines. And I sort of see testing as the same way, as if we can actually automate the process, but real automation, real mechanical automation, testing exactly like humans and end users are doing something. I think that's one way to really change the way that, I think different organizations have different perspectives on testing. Of course, testing is a core and fundamental process to a lot of entities, to a lot of frameworks, but I think we can get more adoption and more, more organizations embracing it even further if we can make testing just a more fun and innovative thing to do by having more opportunities around infrastructure and testing.
Thank you. Evelyn.
Well, from the ORAM perspective, I think we are at a point where we need targeted investment. I think one of the issues, again, when you have this environment where you have a lot of diverse players that you're trying to get to cooperate, sometimes it's hard. No one wants to be the first mover. They don't want to jump in by themselves. And on something when we need something more authoritative across the ecosystem for the players to be working together, when you need that, sometimes you have to find the investment from outside of those parties. And I do think if we really want to accelerate towards adoption of these more diverse, complex systems, it's probably time that we need an infusion of investment to help that along. And so it is good, around the globe, we're seeing more public sector funds looking at the environment, again, with that eye towards greater adoption. But I do think that's a key piece that is going to bring the ecosystem together, getting more of that targeted investment.
Thank you, Evelyn.
I think bringing the concept of AI and automation into the core organization and investing into that. We hear of titles like Chief Technology Officer and Chief Strategy Officer within companies. We don't hear of Chief AI and Automation Officers within the industry. And I think that's an area organizationally, if it's thought of as an overarching theme of investments, as you look at deploying technologies like 5G, you're taking into account the organizational AI and automation strategy, putting that together and delivering the outcomes that are needed. And that if those type of investments are made, I think we can resolve a lot of challenges that are impeding speed right now.
Thank you, Rakshit. Kristian.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things you can do to get it more efficient in terms of getting a system ready. I would focus on one thing, is to make sure we get alignment on the expectations or requirements, particularly from the operator side, because that determines how the ecosystem in terms of vendors and the tools and systems used to verify how that all comes together. So more alignment on the expectations.
Okay, thank you. And Yuri, to conclude.
Yeah, I would add that on the investment theme, the investment's already being made, right? A lot of operators are deploying standalone 5G on cloud native, right? And with that will come success of 5G slicing, private 5G, new and unique use cases. And I think that will fuel the investments from the commercial side, right? And then things become balanced and can become successful and drive all of this. So I think that's what, we need some commercial success more.
Thank you. Well, look, we've come to 3 seconds before the end of our time. So thank you. Will you join me in giving the panelists a warm round of applause? And thank you very much. Great expertise. Thank you for joining us. And enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.